Before I knew my grandmother controlled more money than anyone in my family would admit, I thought she was just a sweet old woman who got confused about names. Before she reached across the hospital cafeteria counter and unpinned my name badge right off my chest, I thought she had wandered off from a visitors group and needed help finding an elevator. I thought I was about to spend 20 minutes walking a confused 80-year-old back to the lobby. I had no idea she was about to level 2 companies, shatter my cousin's carefully constructed future, and place a folder of evidence on a boardroom table in front of every investor my family had spent 30 years cultivating. My name is Nina Caldwell, and at 11:43 on a Wednesday night, I was standing behind the steam table in the basement cafeteria of Mercy General Hospital, wearing a hairnet and a uniform the color of old mustard, scraping the last of the mashed potatoes into a holding tray. I was on hour 15 of my day. My lower back had a specific, grinding ache that I had stopped noticing somewhere around hour 10. The fluorescent light directly above the serving station flickered every 40 seconds. I had counted. I was 29 years old. I held a bachelor's degree in healthcare administration from a state university I had paid for entirely on my own, with loans that sent me a reminder email every single month without fail. I was supposed to use that degree. I had spent 4 years learning hospital systems, patient flow management, insurance billing structures, and workforce compliance. I had graduated with a 3.7 gigapascals and a letter of recommendation from a professor who told me I had a rare instinct for seeing how broken systems could be fixed. What I actually used that degree for, at 11:43 on a Wednesday night, was knowing exactly how far below the legal temperature threshold the mashed potatoes had dropped, and exactly how much trouble the cafeteria manager would be in if a state inspector walked through the door. That particular knowledge paid me nothing extra. I needed to explain something first, because I knew what the question would be. I could already hear it. "You have a degree. Why are you scraping potato trays at midnight?" The answer was my father, Richard Caldwell. He was the kind of man who announced decisions the way other people announce the weather as an observable fact, not a matter of opinion. When I graduated and told him I wanted to work in hospital administration, work my way up through an actual healthcare system and build something real, he set down his coffee cup with a sound like a gavel and told me the only administration I would be working in was Caldwell Groups. The family business was commercial real estate and hospitality. Hotels, convention centers, a portfolio of mixed-use developments that my grandfather had started and my father had expanded into something that got his name on civic award plaques. I told him I didn't want to displace tenants. I told him I had watched what Caldwell Group's development deals looked like from the outside, the buildings that went up shining and new, while the people who had lived in those neighborhoods quietly disappeared. He told me I was being naive. I told him I was being honest. He told me that if I chose a path outside the company, I was choosing to walk it without a single dollar of family money behind me. He meant it. Within a month of graduation, the account he had always told me would be there for me had been restructured. My name was gone from it. So, I found a job. The healthcare administration positions at hospitals required 2 to 3 years of experience in a clinical setting. I had 0. Entry level meant billing specialist, patient services, coordinator, unit secretary. I applied for all of them. The rejection emails were polite and fast. While I waited, I took the cafeteria position at Mercy General because it kept me inside a hospital system, because I told myself it was temporary, and because it paid enough to cover exactly 2/3 of my monthly expenses if I was careful. The other third came from my second job. 4 evenings a week, I worked the front desk at a mid-range hotel downtown called the Harrington Inn, checking guests in, handling complaints, managing the chaos of a short-staffed evening shift. I was good at it. I was organized and calm in a way that confused my coworkers, who could not figure out why someone who spoke like she had management potential was standing behind a check-in desk at 6 in the evening. Together, the 2 jobs covered rent, utilities, transportation, minimum loan payments, and food if I planned the week carefully. There was nothing left after that. No cushion, no savings, no margin for error. A broken tooth had kept me up for 11 days before I could afford to see a dentist. I did not own a working winter coat. I wore a fleece under my cafeteria jacket when the temperatures dropped and told myself it was fine. My family knew I was working 2 jobs. They knew the way people know something they have decided not to really look at. The information existed somewhere at the edge of their awareness, and they kept it there, out of focus. At the few family dinners I was still included in, they referred to my situation as me being independent. My aunt called it a phase. My cousin Carter, who had been handed a senior acquisitions manager title at Caldwell Group before his 28th birthday, called it stubborn. He said it at Thanksgiving 2 years ago with a smile that never touched his eyes, his hand wrapped around a glass of wine that cost more than my electric bill. She's always been stubborn. It's actually kind of admirable, in a way. The table had laughed. I had looked down at my plate and eaten quietly and driven home at 9:30 because I had a 6 a.m. shift. My grandmother, Eleanor Caldwell, had been at that table. She sat at the far end, small and precise, eating her food without commenting on other people's. She had not laughed. She had not nodded along. She had looked at me across the long table with an expression I could not read, and when I left, she was the only one who stood up and walked me to the door. She visited me once every month or so at my apartment, a studio on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator worked approximately half the time. She would take the stairs without complaint, sit in my single armchair, and ask me questions. Not soft, polite questions. Specific ones. What does your pay stub show for overtime this week? Does the hotel document your hours digitally or on paper? When your supervisor at the cafeteria sends you home early to avoid hitting 40 hours, do you have that in writing? I thought she was asking because she was sharp in the way very old people sometimes are hyper-focused on small details because the large ones had become slippery. I would answer gently, redirect her, offer her tea. I thought I was managing her confusion. I had no idea she was building a case. The night she came into the cafeteria, it was a Wednesday in February. The dinner rush was long over. The only people left in the basement were 2 residents who had been on shift since 6 that morning, eating reheated pasta at a corner table without speaking, and a security guard named Terrence who came down every night at 11:30 for coffee and always left me a $1 tip on the counter, even though tipping at a hospital cafeteria was not a thing anyone did. I had told him several times it was not necessary. He told me it was always necessary to recognize someone doing their job right. I was washing down the steam table when I heard the cafeteria door open. I looked up. My grandmother was walking across the linoleum floor in her good wool coat and her low leather heels, looking for all the world like she had taken a wrong turn on the way to somewhere important. She moved slowly, but her eyes were scanning not the lost, searching look of someone who did not know where they were, but the deliberate look of someone taking inventory. She reached the counter. She looked at me. She looked at the hairnet. She looked at the mustard-colored uniform. She looked at my name badge, Nina Caldwell, cafeteria staff, and without a word, she reached over the sneeze guard and unpinned it from my chest. I grabbed the counter. Grandmother, what are you doing here? It's almost midnight. She held the badge up in the cafeteria light, the same way someone examines a receipt they think is wrong. She read my name off it like she was confirming something she had suspected. Then she slid it into the pocket of her wool coat. You are not going to need this much longer, she said. Her voice was clear and unhurried. It landed in the empty cafeteria like a stone into still water. My manager, a man named Dale, who ran the cafeteria with the specific pettiness of someone whose authority extended about 30 feet in any direction, chose that exact moment to appear from the back office. He saw my grandmother standing at the counter. He saw the empty spot on my chest where my badge had been. His expression shifted from mildly curious to aggressively territorial. Hudson, he always called me by my middle name by mistake, and I had stopped correcting him. Is there a problem out here? He looked at my grandmother the way he looked at everything that interrupted his closing routine. Ma'am, the cafeteria is closed to visitors after 10. I'm going to have to ask you to return to the main lobby. My grandmother did not look at him. She kept her eyes on me. How many hours? She asked. Did you work this week? Be specific. Face went hot. The 2 residents at the corner table had stopped eating and were watching. Terrence, still holding his coffee, had gone very still. It's fine, I said. Please, just can I walk you back upstairs? Be specific, Nina. I swallowed. About 70, maybe 72, between both jobs. Dale made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. Lady, I don't know what this is, but she needs to finish closing or I'm writing her up. He reached past me toward the badge in her pocket, a gesture so presumptuous it seemed to surprise even him when my grandmother simply took one small step to the left and his hand closed on nothing. She looked at him then, just once. It was not an aggressive look. It was the look of someone who has already processed a situation and moved on to the next step. Then she turned back to me. "I'll be here on Sunday," she said. "Keep your morning clear." Sunday was 3 days away. Sunday was also the day of the Caldwell Group annual leadership gala, which I had heard about from my coworker Maya at the hotel, who had seen it posted on the company's public social media. It was the 30th anniversary celebration of the company's founding. The event where my father and his brother were publicly, officially, and ceremonially announcing that Carter would become the next managing director of Caldwell Group. A coronation with a catered dinner and a guest list that had been finalized months ago without my name on it. I had not been invited. I had found out the same way I found out about most of my family's milestones through a phone call I was not the primary recipient of, in which my mother explained in her careful, regretful voice that it was a professional event, that the focus needed to be on the company, that my situation might make things complicated for Carter's introduction to the major investors. My situation, the word she used for the fact that I was working 2 jobs and could not afford a gown. My father had taken the phone from her partway through and said, more directly, that my presence would raise questions he did not want to answer in front of their investors. My cousin Carter had been in the background, not saying anything but not leaving the room either, and that silence told me everything I needed to know about how much he had pushed back on the decision. I had gone to work the next morning and not told anyone. My grandmother left the cafeteria at 11:52. Dale wrote me up for allowing a visitor to handle employee property. I stood in the break room after my shift ended and looked at the write-up and thought about how much it would matter in 6 months. I could not answer that question. I went home. Sunday morning, my grandmother called at 7:45. She asked me to come to her apartment in the senior living complex on the east side, the one she had chosen herself 15 years ago because she liked the library on the 2nd floor and the view of the park. My family described the facility as modest, which was their way of expressing mild, sustained confusion over why a woman with her resources had chosen to live simply. She had never explained herself to them. I took the bus. She met me at the door of her unit wearing her housecoat and reading glasses and looking more alert than I had felt in 2 years. On her kitchen table was a folder, brown cardboard, tied shut with a piece of string. It was thick enough that the cover bowed slightly upward. She gestured at it and sat down across from me. "Open it," she said. I untied the string. The folder was full of paper, photocopies of my pay stubs from the cafeteria, going back 11 months, printed screenshots of my digital time logs from the Harrington Inn, with certain entries circled in red pen, a handwritten ledger, her script small and precise, documenting dates, hours, and discrepancies she had noted between the hours I worked and the hours I was paid for. At the back, 2 printed emails. I squinted at them, correspondence between the hotel's regional manager and the local branch manager about keeping part-time staff below the overtime threshold by sending them home early, and logging it as voluntary departure. She had taken the emails from my recycling. I had printed them once, months ago, when I was trying to understand why my paychecks kept coming in slightly lower than I calculated, and then I had thrown them away because I did not know what to do with them, and the thought of doing anything had felt like standing at the edge of something I could not see the bottom of. She had retrieved them from the trash. She had been doing this for almost a year. Where did I stop? All the visits, all the specific questions. Grandmother. She folded her hands on the table. "You were not going to do anything with it yourself," she said. "You were too tired." She said it without judgment, the same way she might observe that it was raining. "You were surviving. People who are surviving do not file complaints with labor boards. They hold on." She paused. "I have been holding on to the evidence for you until you had enough left to fight." I looked at the folder. I looked at the numbers in her handwritten ledger. She had calculated, in her careful small script, that between unpaid overtime at the cafeteria shifts that ran long and were clocked out at the scheduled time, not the actual time and the systematic hour shaving at the hotel, I was owed somewhere in the range of $4,000 over the past year alone. I did not cry. I wanted to. I pressed my hands flat on the table instead. She leaned forward. "The family dinner is tonight. I know you were not invited." She said it without softening it, because she had never believed that softening a true thing made it kinder. "I need you there." I shook my head before she finished the sentence. "I can't. They'll have security on the guest list. My father will." "You will receive an invitation," she said. "It will not come from your father." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her grip was surprisingly firm for a woman who weighed perhaps 110 pounds. "And Nina," she waited until I looked at her. "Is there anyone who has helped you? Anyone who saw what was happening and did not look away?" I thought about that. Two people came to mind immediately. Dr. Patricia Osei was a hospitalist at Mercy General who came through the cafeteria every morning before 6 and every night after 10 and always said thank you when I handed her coffee, not as a reflex but as something she actually meant. She had noticed the hospital bracelet on my wrist one morning 6 weeks ago. I had been at urgent care the night before for a kidney infection. I had let go too long because I kept telling myself it would pass, and she had sat down at the counter and talked to me for 20 minutes. She had asked about my degree. She had asked why I was not in administration. She had listened to the whole answer without filling in the silence with reassurances I did not need. At the end, she had given me her direct number and told me to call her when I was ready to do something about it, whatever it turned out to be. James Rourke was a labor rights attorney who stayed at the Harrington Inn 3 or 4 nights a month for depositions at the courthouse 2 blocks over. He was quiet and organized and always had the same request at check-in room away from the elevator: extra towels, wake-up call at 5:30. The night I had been called in to cover a shift on 4 hours sleep, still shaking slightly from the kidney infection, antibiotics, he had looked at me across the desk and asked, plainly, how long I had been working both jobs. I told him. He asked if my employer was documenting my overtime correctly. I said I didn't think so. He had written something on the back of one of his business cards and slid it across the desk. "That's the State Labor Board's direct complaint line," he said. "The bar for wage theft documentation is lower than most people think. If you have pay stubs, you likely have a case." He had gone to his room and I had stood at the front desk holding his card and thought about it for the rest of the shift. I told my grandmother about both of them. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she had the same expression she had worn in the cafeteria, not surprised, but satisfied, the way someone looks when a number they calculated turns out to be correct. "Good," she said simply. "Call them. Tell them there is an event tonight and I would like them to attend as your guests." She stood up and went to her desk and came back with a cream-colored envelope and set it in front of me. Inside was an invitation-heavy cardstock, formal print to the Caldwell Group 30th Anniversary Gala at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. In the top left corner, the return address was not my family's. It was a law firm I recognized from my grandfather's estate correspondence. The invitation had my name on it. Below it, in my grandmother's handwriting, "Bring the people who showed up for you. I will handle the rest." I called Patricia first. She answered on the second ring. She did not ask me why I was calling on a Sunday morning. She listened. When I finished explaining, she was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "I have a board meeting with the hospital trustees next week, and 2 of your father's largest investors are on that board. This seems like a useful preliminary conversation. I'll be there." "What time?" James Rourke took slightly longer. I reached his voicemail, then his direct cell. When I explained the situation, the folder of documentation, my grandmother's preparation, the gala that night, he said nothing for a moment. Then, "The Whitmore Grand? My firm has been looking for an opportunity to speak with Caldwell Group's operations partners about their contractor labor practices for about 18 months. Tell your grandmother I said thank you." He paused. "And Nina, don't let them seat you in a corner." I almost laughed. I told him I would try. The gala was black tie. I had nothing that qualified. I went to the Goodwill on Marsh Street and found a deep green dress on the rack, structured and clean-lined, with a small tear at the hem I repaired with the travel sewing kit I kept at the bottom of my bag for hotel emergencies. The dress cost $14. I put on the small pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my college graduation. Standing in my bathroom mirror, I did not look like a cafeteria worker. I looked like someone who had decided something, The Whitmore Grand was a building I knew the inside of better than most of the guests who arrived that night in black sedans and suits that cost more than my monthly rent. Caldwell Group did not own the Whitmore, but they had hosted events here before, and Harrington Inn shared a regional cleaning contractor with two of the Whitmore's auxiliary properties. I had met the catering staff coordinator, a woman named Bev, twice at a regional vendor meeting I had attended as a proxy for my hotel manager. She had been the one to tell me, 3 years ago, that the real power in any event was always held by whoever controlled the room before the guests arrived. I thought about that walking up the front steps. The check-in table was staffed by 2 young women with headsets and a digital guest list on a laptop. The first one scanned the list when I gave my name, and her expression did the thing I expected, a slight, controlled tightening that meant she had found the name, but it was flagged somehow, or seated somewhere inconvenient, or both. She told me I was confirmed for one, with an apologetic smile. I told her I had 3 guests. She consulted her screen. "That's not the reservation shows a single." Patricia stepped forward, unhurried and authoritative in the way that people are when they are used to walking into rooms where their presence creates an immediate adjustment. "I'm Dr. Patricia Osei." She handed the woman a card. "I'm here with Nina." The woman stared at the card. She looked up at Patricia, then at James beside her, who said his own name quietly and let the title attorney at law do what it always did. The third guest, a woman named Cora Blaine, who was a healthcare policy reporter for the city's largest digital news outlet and who had interviewed Patricia once for a piece on hospital labor conditions and had been glad to come when Patricia made a call that afternoon, simply smiled. We were shown inside. The main ballroom of the Whitmore Grand was everything the Caldwell family believed a room should be: grand, expensive, and arranged to communicate hierarchy at a glance. Long tables covered in white linen, floral arrangements that stood eye level, lighting designed to be flattering in photographs. At the front, an elevated platform with a podium and a screen showing a rotating slideshow of Caldwell Group properties. My father and his brother were already at the head table, glad-handing investors in the practiced, effortless way of men who had been doing it since their 20s. Carter stood slightly behind my father, accepting congratulations with a smile that was genuinely warm. He was good at that. The warmth. I had never doubted it was real, and wearing a suit that I knew from his Instagram post that morning had been purchased specifically for tonight. My mother was the one who saw us first. She was speaking to a woman from one of the civic foundations that Caldwell Group donated to for the tax benefit, and I watched the words stop in her mouth. Her gaze went from me to Patricia to James to Cora's press badge. Cora had it clipped to her bag, unhidden, which was a choice, and the blood drained from her face in a visible, unambiguous sequence. My father intercepted us before we reached the third table. He moved with the speed of a man who had managed crises before. His smile stretched into something that was technically still a smile. "Nina." His voice was warm for the benefit of the tables within earshot. What a surprise. He looked at my guests with the assessing speed of someone reading a threat matrix. "I don't believe he started. This is Dr. Patricia Osei," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. "She's a hospitalist at Mercy General. This is James Rourke. He's a labor rights attorney. And this is Cora Blaine. She covers healthcare and labor policy for the Tribune Digital. They've been incredibly supportive of me over the past several months." The word fainted stayed behind my teeth. I left it there. I didn't need it. My father's jaw moved. He processed the combination: a hospital physician, a labor attorney. A reporter and I watched him understand that there was no version of this moment he could manage cleanly in front of the room full of people currently watching. "Your table," he started, recovering, gesturing toward the back. "We're happy with wherever you have us," James said pleasantly. He shifted his portfolio from one hand to the other. "We wouldn't dream of being a disruption to the program." My father looked at me one more time. His eyes asked me a question I did not answer. We walked to our table. It was in the back left corner of the ballroom, positioned near the service corridor with the kind of deliberate precision that communicated exactly what my family wanted it to communicate. The noise from the kitchen was audible through the swinging door beside us. The tablecloth did not quite reach the corners. One of the chairs had a slightly shorter leg than the others, and rocked when you sat in it. Patricia looked around the table and said, cheerfully, "Excellent sightlines." She was not being polite. She had already turned her chair slightly outward and was scanning the head table with the calm, professional attention of someone conducting an intake assessment. James opened his portfolio on his lap without drawing attention to it. Cora set her phone face up on the table, recording. I realized and tucked her notebook beside her plate. The program began. A master of ceremonies with an expensive haircut talked about Caldwell Group's legacy. Investors were introduced. A video played. My father spoke from the podium about vision and perseverance, and the courage it takes to build something that lasts. He spoke about family. He looked at Carter while he said it, and then the doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and my grandmother walked in. She was on the arm of her personal attorney, a compact, careful man named Howard Finch, who I had seen exactly once before, at my grandfather's funeral, where he had stood slightly apart from the family with the expression of a man who knows something that is not yet the right moment to say. My grandmother wore dark blue. She moved slowly, but she held herself like someone who had already decided the outcome of every conversation in the room. My father saw her. His face went through several things very quickly. She did not go to the head table. She did not stop at table 1 or table 5 or anywhere in the vicinity of where she was expected to be. She walked the length of the ballroom with Howard Finch matching her pace, and she came to table 19, in the corner by the kitchen door, and she sat down in the chair across from me. The room noticed. 200 people noticed simultaneously, the way rooms do when something happens that doesn't fit the script. The murmuring started at the tables closest to the front and moved backward like weather. My father was at the podium. He gripped the sides of it. She reached into her coat pocket. She set my name badge on the white linen tablecloth between us. Nina Caldwell, cafeteria staff. The plastic was slightly scuffed from 11 months of use. Then she reached into the other pocket and produced the brown folder. The MC moved to wrap up his remarks. There was to be a formal toast, and then the announcement Carter's appointment, the transfer of managing director authority, the beginning of the next chapter of Caldwell Group. My uncle was already standing, his champagne glass ready. My grandmother raised one hand, a small, precise gesture, and Howard Finch stepped forward and spoke quietly to the MC. I could not hear what he said. The MC nodded slowly and took a half step back from the podium. My grandmother stood up. Someone brought a microphone to her because Howard Finch had arranged it in advance, and the room went quiet with the particular attention that fills a space when the oldest person in it decides to speak. I have been coming to these dinners for 30 years, she said. Her voice was clear and carried without effort. For most of them, I sat where I was told to sit, and I said what was expected of me. Tonight I am sitting where my granddaughter is, and I am going to say what is true. Carter's smile had stopped. My father had stepped away from the podium and was moving toward her, his face controlled, his eyes not controlled at all. She held up the brown folder. My granddaughter Nina has worked 2 jobs for 4 years. She has a degree in healthcare administration that she earned on her own without $1 of assistance from this family because her father told her that declining to join the company meant declining the family. She continued without looking at my father. She has worked an average of 68 hours a week across those 2 jobs. She has been denied overtime pay that she is legally owed. She has had hours systematically removed from her logged time to keep her below the threshold that would require her employer to pay her correctly. I have been documenting it for 11 months. She opened the folder and passed it across the table to James, who received it with both hands and opened it immediately, and began reading with the focused, unhurried attention of a man in a professional setting. This, my grandmother said, is wage theft. The state defines it precisely. James, quietly and without standing, said the section number and the applicable statute. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Cora Blaine's hand moved to her notebook. My father reached the table. Eleanor. His voice was low and careful. This is not the place. You chose the place, she said, looking at him directly. You chose every place Nina was excluded from. You chose to call her situation a phase when she was working before sunrise and after midnight to pay her own rent. You chose to seat her by the kitchen door tonight. You chose all of the places. She held his gaze. So I am choosing this one. Dad, Carter said from the front of the room. He had moved off the platform. His voice was careful, and I will give him credit, he tried. Grandmother, maybe we should find somewhere to talk privately. There is nothing about this that is private, she said. She looked out at the room full of investors and partners and people who had known my father for decades. "You are all here because this family asked you to witness a transfer of authority tonight. I am asking you to witness a different one." From her coat pocket, she produced an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, the same weight as my invitation. Howard Finch spoke. He introduced himself and his firm and said the following in the careful, unchallengeable language of a man who had drafted documents for 50 years. The Caldwell Family Trust, which had been established by Eleanor Caldwell and her late husband as the foundational asset from which Caldwell Group's original capital had been drawn, capital that my father's generation had always presented as their own accomplishment, had been restructured. The controlling interest in that trust was Eleanor's to direct. She had directed it. Effective that morning, a separate entity had been established, the Caldwell Worker Advocacy Foundation. Its first executive director was Nina Caldwell. My father said something. I could not hear it over the sound of the room. The foundation's initial endowment, Howard continued, would be used to retain independent legal representation for any current or former employee of the Harrington Inn regional chain or Mercy General's contracted food service operator who could demonstrate unpaid wages. The foundation would also commission an independent audit of Caldwell Group's own contractor labor practices, overseen by Councilwoman Patricia Osei. He misspoke. Patricia was not a councilwoman, she was a physician, but the weight of the sentence landed correctly, and the room absorbed it. My cousin Carter was looking at me. His expression was not the one I expected. He did not look furious. He looked like someone who had just realized that the story he had been told about his family had missing pages, and the pages had been there the whole time, and someone else had been reading them. My father found his voice. "She is not qualified," he said. "She has no business experience. She has been working in a cafeteria." His voice rose slightly, and he caught it and pulled it back. "Mother, you are making a decision that affects 30 years of work based on sentiment, based on evidence," my grandmother said. She picked up my name badge from the table and held it up the same way she had in the cafeteria, turning it in the light. "Your daughter has managed her own budget, her own transportation, her own health care, her own loan payments, and her own schedule across 2 jobs for 4 years without assistance from anyone in this room. She has built professional relationships with people who arrived here tonight without being paid or pressured to do so." She looked at Patricia, at James, at Cora. "She has more practical experience managing broken systems than most people sitting at this table have accumulated in decades of meetings." She set the badge down. "The only thing she has been denied is the title." The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that means everyone is calculating. Mr. Harrington, a banker whose name I knew from my grandmother's stories, set down his glass and looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at my grandmother and nodded once, a small movement that seemed to carry a great deal of information. 2 of the investors near the front asked Howard Finch for his card. They did it quietly, without drama, the way professionals register where the weight has shifted. My father stood in the middle of the room and said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the room would believe. Later, when the program had dissolved and people were leaving in quiet, purposeful groups, I found Carter standing near the side exit, his jacket open, his glass empty. He saw me and did not look away. "I want you to know," he said, "that I didn't—" He stopped. He tried again. "I never thought it was right. What they did at graduation. I want you to know that." I looked at him. I believed him. That was the complicated thing about Carter. He had benefited from every decision that had harmed me, and he had not stopped any of them, and he had not known, probably, the full weight of what he was benefiting from. I believed the regret was real. I also believed it had arrived 4 years too late. I nodded. "We can talk about it," I said. "Not tonight." He accepted that. My grandmother found me by the service corridor, Howard Finch a few steps behind her. She was tired, I could see it now. The effort the evening had cost her, but her eyes were clear. I held out her coat and helped her into it. She put her hand briefly on my face the way she used to when I was small, a gesture that meant nothing was required of me in response. "I'm sorry it took this long," she said. I shook my head. "You came." She patted my cheek once and then let her hand drop. "You did the work, Nina. All of it. I just made sure no one could pretend otherwise." 3 weeks later, I was in a small office on the 4th floor of a building 4 blocks from the hospital, sitting across a desk from a woman who was handing me an official letter of appointment. The letterhead said Caldwell Worker Advocacy Foundation. My name was in the salutation. My title was below it. On the desk in front of me was the brown folder, the pay stubs, the ledger in my grandmother's handwriting, and a legal demand letter James had filed on behalf of 11 current and former employees of the Harrington Inn's regional offices. Patricia had a standing meeting scheduled with the hospital's operations board the following Tuesday. Cora's piece had run that morning. It had been shared widely enough that by noon the Harrington's regional director had issued a statement that used the phrase, "reviewing our compensation practices," which was the corporate version of the sound a car makes when it realizes too late that it has driven off the edge of something. My phone buzzed. A text from Bev, the catering coordinator from the Whitmore Grand, who had apparently heard the full story from someone on the evening's wait staff. She had worked in event hospitality for 22 years, and she had a question about whether the foundation was planning to look into contractor scheduling practices in the hospitality sector, because she had documentation going back a long time and had been waiting for someone to ask. I wrote back immediately. I told her yes. I told her to come in any time. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the street 4 floors below. At the people moving through the ordinary business of a Tuesday morning, a delivery driver, 2 nurses in scrubs eating lunch on a bench, a woman pushing a stroller with one hand and checking her phone with the other. Ordinary people managing the logistics of being alive on wages that were mostly too small for the effort required. I thought about the name badge in my desk drawer. I had kept it. I was not entirely sure why. I thought it was because it was proof not of what I had been, but of what I had shown up for, every single day, when showing up was the only option I had. Some people build their credentials in boardrooms. I had built mine somewhere else entirely, and it turned out that somewhere else was exactly where the work needed to be done. If you have ever been told that what you do does not count because of where you do it, I want you to hear this. Every system that is broken has someone inside it who understands exactly how it is broken because they are the one cleaning up after it. That knowledge is not nothing. That knowledge is everything. They just do not want you to know that you could use it. Thank you for listening. If this story reached you somewhere you needed it to, please share it. There is someone out there still in the hairnet, still in the uniform, still doing the math on whether they can afford to keep going. Let this find them.